Welcome to another episode of the Not Another Yoga Class podcast and LinkedIn Live series. Today, we have an amazing guest. We have Kathryn Rogers, who is going to talk to us all about divorce and the effects of divorce on the working person. So, Kathryn, could you do a very quick intro about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Jamie. So I'm Kathryn Rogers. I'm an independent HR consultant. So I have my own business, and I also support lots of other small businesses to look after their people well and get good people results and make sure they're complying with the law.
Fabulous. And I want you to tell me a little bit about what was going on through the time that you were going divorce and how that affected you, because this is something that a lot of people go through. And I feel like it's something that maybe goes under the radar a little bit, which is often the most dangerous thing, right? We talk about stress quite a lot as going under the radar and all the negative effects from that. Another one of those things that just sort of happens to someone and they're left in this extremely traumatic situation where they're trying to keep everything juggling. They're trying to keep performing at work. They're trying to make sure that any loved ones or kids or whatever aren't as affected by it as they could be. So kind of give us a little bit of background into the situation, and then we'll explore a little bit in the solutions, I guess, and some of the things that managers could do to help support their people going through the same.
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly for me, and I would imagine for probably quite a lot of people who decide to get divorced, it wasn't an overnight thing. It had been building up for a long time. So at the point where somebody communicates at work that this is what they're going through, there's probably already quite a lot of stress there. There may have been long-term issues in the relationship, and all sorts of different things can lead to somebody deciding to end a marriage. But yeah, for me, it'd been building up for a long time. And I think when I initially made the decision behind the scenes, I was determined I wasn't going to tell anybody. And I was also determined it wasn't going to affect me at work at all. And I think it took we separated in the August. We actually lived in the same house for 10 months after that because neither of us could afford to pay rent and a mortgage. So that was fun.
I imagine that's quite common though, right?
I would think so. Yeah. So, then, you don't have that space at the end of the day or outside the working day where I guess there's a constant level of stress there when you're in the same house as somebody that, you're not going to be, that you're getting divorced from. And it probably only took about 2 or 3 months before I thought, you know what, I really need to let my clients know about this. Because at that point, aside from the stress of living together, there wasn't much to do from a legal point of view. The process takes as long as it takes. It's fairly straightforward in terms of you file your paperwork online. I think at that point, the impact is more about the grief, essentially, and the start of going through that grief curve, because much as it's not a loss of a person, it's a loss of the future that you thought you were going to have. It's a loss of the story you've told yourself about your marriage, in terms of where you are, and for me, kind of some of the things that we'd figured out about each other. And then there's all the fear about, well, how am I going to manage financially on my own? What are we going to do in terms of custody with our little boy? How long is the house going to take to sell? How long am I going to be stuck here? And that's a lot to be going on outside of also what's happening in my business. Am I looking after my clients? Am I looking after myself? Because it's, as soon as you've got a big stressor like that on, it's very easy to kind of just turtle up, or tortoise up. Sorry, I don't have to. Just kind of retreat back into your shell and be like, no, I'm not going outside. I'm just really kind of go with the comfort zone stuff to try and look after yourself. So I guess there's probably been a big build up before somebody actually communicates, this is what's happening in my relationship. And then there's a lot of questions to answer in terms of, well, what does this mean now and in the future? And for me, it just meant that, my brain was constantly whirring, with a whole load of other stuff outside of what do I need to do to get on with my day-to-day actual job and do a good job there.
I can imagine that sort of masking behavior adds to that exhaustion as well, right? So it's like you've got all of this stuff to think about. You're pretending that everything's fine. you're starting to fall into habits, like you said, that are not conducive to good mental and physical health. It's kind of like a snowball effect, really.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, obviously divorce is much more common now. But I think there's a little bit of shame there as well. You know, you don't really want to tell somebody, you don't want people to know that your relationship's not worked out, because inevitably people will ask questions. You don't necessarily want to talk about all of the reasons with everybody. And people respond in all sorts of different ways. So then you're kind of thinking, well, I know for me, certainly I was thinking, well, how am I going to deal with that? The number of people that were like, oh, I'm really, really sorry to hear that. And it's like, actually, at this point, it's actually a good thing. It's a relief in some ways that we've made the decision. It's giving me a way forward. Like, yes, there's lots to go through before we get there, but that kind of dealing with other people's reactions. And then you very quickly get into, oh, but don't worry, you'll meet somebody else. You'll get married again. I'm like, honestly, that is the last thing on my mind right now.
I can imagine. Do you know what's really interesting? I did another episode about bereavement with Alison and Alison Whitfield, and she mentioned exactly the same thing. So you're right. There are parallels here between those two things. People's reactions to it are very, like, spookily similar for a bereavement or something that someone's lost someone, and this, which is like you said. But the interesting thing there is they lead to totally different endings, right? Yeah. You're starting something else. You're starting a different journey. They've experienced something that's, but I guess yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a strange one, certainly, in terms of that kind of, how do I respond to somebody else, and how do I take?
Do you have any advice?
I mean, I think for managers in the workplace, I think I would try to just listen as much as you can. I think it's natural as humans that we want to try and offer solutions, and we want to try and help, and we want to try and guide somebody forwards. But actually, people need to find their own way most of the time, and rather than the kind of, I'm really sorry to hear that. Sometimes it's just something a bit more neutral, like, that sounds really hard. Or is there anything I can do to help? Or sometimes just kind of trying to do the things that will help. Because when you've already got kind of I've got to file my paperwork, and I've got to find a solicitor, and I've got to find a mediator, and I've got to put the house on the market, and you've got this checklist in your head. Somebody else saying, what can I do to help? You're like, well, I don't want to have to give you a list as well. Can you just maybe just do something? And I know in the workplace that's probably going to be tough to know, well, what should I do?
Well, I mean, there's going to be elements of your role that they understand, right? So there's going to be bits and pieces at work. So they could definitely take something out of your, I don't know, daily workload.
Yeah. So I guess, if you're in an employed role, it could be perhaps, your manager thinking about, well, do you really need to be at all of these meetings? Is there time that we can clear in your diary that way? Is there a bit of flexibility that we can allow around your working hours, so that if you have got appointments with solicitors, etc., that you need to get to, if you've got paperwork that you need to deal with, then can that be done within your working day, so you can start moving through things faster? If you have got children, at some point you're going to have the conversation with your children about, this is what's happening. So again, flexibility around that. It's always nice to be able to signpost people towards resources. I mean, I don't actually have a particular list of resources off the top of my head that I could say to somebody, this is what I found helpful, because but being able to point people in the direction of, well, there might be some useful information here, or if you need to just have a confidential off the record chat with somebody, then get in touch with the likes of you guys. If there's free legal services, you can point them in the direction of as well. Then you are likely going to have somebody who's feeling really, really overwhelmed, and a whole host of emotions. So there's going to be sadness that things haven't worked out the way that they thought they would, but there could also be sort of excitement, and that there's a whole load of things that could be going on.
So a question like, how are you feeling, would be very appropriate.
Yeah, or even just, how are you feeling today? Because you're gonna be all over the place.
Yeah, sure, that's true. Yeah.
And I guess, maybe not to expect too complicated an answer. It's almost a bit like, when you're at the airport and you go through and you get how was your experience? And you've got kind of green, smiley, neutral, straight, and then the sad face in the end. It's almost just like, all right, give me a score. How are you doing today? And then depending on how they respond, it might, okay, well, that doesn't sound great. Would you like a further chat? Can we go for a cuppa? Can we go for a little walk outside? Something like that, just to keep that kind of conversation about their well-being going. And I think quite often what I see with businesses where somebody who's gone off sick, rather than somebody who's kind of at work and dealing with stress, is that they're terrified to ask them the question, that they think they're going to get something wrong. They think, they're worried about offending people. But I don't know that you can ever really offend somebody by asking how they are.
Yeah.
If they don't want to talk, push it. But yeah.
Is there a particular tone you'd advise someone to talk in? What I was told once, whenever you're talking to someone who is experiencing grief or bereavement, try not to talk in a tone of sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
So if instead of saying, how are you today? Just saying, look, how are you today? How are you doing today? Like genuine question, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would advise for someone to do or not do? Because when we did the episode on bereavement, this was the thing that most people were interested in, was I've experienced this. I've had a colleague go through this, a friend or a family member go through this, and I didn't know what to say and I didn't know how to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think just keeping it kind of neutral, practical, rather than doing, I guess, so how are you today? I'm terrible for the head tilt. I catch myself doing it all the time.
Okay, I mean, this is useful as well. The sort of let's kind of. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, go on. You go ahead.
I was just say that awareness of body language as well, because if you've got somebody in front of you, because it's not just the words. It's tone of voice is really important, but your body language conveys an awful lot as well.
This is very, very true.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes where when I'm saying like maybe go for a walk, sometimes people find it really difficult to talk about things face to face. But if you're side to side and you haven't got that direct eye contact, sometimes people find it easier to open up and to talk about what's really bothering them.
This is a great one. I'm a big advocate for the walk and talk. I've done it many times. Whenever I've been going through something hard, I've always found it easier to be able to open up, looking forward, not looking at someone.
Yeah.
I found it incredibly hard to be honest about something I'm struggling with when I'm facing a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it varies. Some people will be totally okay with that. But again, I think that awareness of, well, how can I tailor my style to best support this individual? And generally the clients I work with are all small businesses. They generally know their team pretty well. So again, it's even thinking about, well, who's going to be the best person to support them through this? It might not be their manager. It might be somebody else in another department that they have a different relationship with, and who they don't perhaps sit next to or see every day or see as often. Because then they don't do the kind of, I'm going to bare my soul and talk about something that's really tough for me right now. And then we're going to sit back down at our desks and get on with our day. So I think sometimes creating that little bit of separation between the welfare and the personal side of things and then the more task-based stuff can be really helpful.
This is great advice. So basically, you could approach this situation as that you feel more comfortable talking to. Is there anyone that you feel comfortable talking to? Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Grab them, have a quick chat, explain to them the situation, and then kind of send those two off into a place where that they feel more comfortable, whether that's a walk or an office or space or whatever it is.
Yeah, or it could be, well, how can we support you to facilitate that? How do they feel comfortable going and asking themselves? Do they want to sit in a room in the office? Do they want to do it in another way? Because again, some people are really comfortable opening up about what's going on for them. Others aren't. There's the whole, if they are sat in a room within the office, can people hear me? Like, is everyone going to think, oh, why are they sitting in there? yeah, it does sometimes a bit of thought around, well, the logistics of what might that support look like, is worth doing as well.
Okay, great. I mean, this is all very actionable, right? These are all very simple, easy things for us to be able to do. We will invariably come across, probably in the next 12 months, a friend, a colleague, a loved one who is going through this.
Yeah.
I would also include breakup in this situation,
Yeah.
because you know, this can be, you know, it can lead to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, the only real difference between a divorce and the end of a long-term relationship is the legal side of things. And to be fair, that was probably the easiest bit to deal with. It was literally just forms going back and forward through the HMRC website, so the government website. There was, you know, very little kind of emotional attachment to that. It was more when it came to sitting down and talking through, what do we do with the money? What do we do with the house? What do we do about our child? How are we going to split up the stuff that we've kind of accumulated over a life together? How do we see that working moving forwards? And I mean, for me, that was probably about 9-10 months after we'd actually kind of told people that we were divorcing, that we then went into that section. And from a physical perspective, that's when it started to have the biggest impact. And, you know, I got to the point where I was having panic attacks, and I guess just the kind of the level of emotional energy that was directed elsewhere had a bigger impact on my work at that point than it did kind of when we first told people what was happening. And I think physically at that point I was actually quite unwell and probably didn't give myself a break. So I think kind of looking for those signs in somebody, being aware, you know, again, when you see people regularly, you know what they're like on a day-to-day basis, you know when they're not themselves. There's an awful lot of intangible things that you pick up from somebody's body language and behavior. But there's even things like, you know, if you've noticed that they're not responding to work stuff in the same way that they would if they've gone quiet, then again, having that more proactive chat about, right, okay, look, we've noticed this, we know you've got a lot on, what can we do? And you know, sometimes that might be signposting them to their GP, signposting them to mental health services, signposting them to yourselves. You know, are you getting the support that you need? Going down, I guess, a more traditional welfare or capability conversation around, you know, is there any medication that you're taking? Is it having any side effect? Do you need to take some time off? Again, for me, it was, I didn't want to admit that I needed the time off. And it took conversations with a couple of other people before I was like, right, okay, well, I'm moving into my new place on this date. I'm not just going to try and power through. I'm going to plan to have, you know, a chunk of time off. And I'm going to start letting people know about that now. And I'm going to start handing things over. And just that relief of knowing that, okay, in a few weeks' time, you're going to have this block of time off where you can just focus on getting yourself sorted and dealing with some of the practical stuff. That was a weight off my mind. Instead of just thinking, I'm just going to have to keep powering through forever. Again, slightly different when you're working for yourself, in the sense that, you know, when you're self-employed, you take time off and it costs you money, but, you know, or it can do anyway. Whereas, you know, if you're employed, you know, you'll have leave to use. You might have, you might take time off sick. Your employer might be able to offer some flexibility around, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to class that time? And that will vary business to business in terms of what resources they've got and what their policies are. But again, I think this is something where, you know, taking things on a case-by-case basis and using a bit of discretion is advisable if you can.
Yeah, I think this is, you've made a really, really good point there about having the bandwidth to be able to untangle this stuff. And so that's then an opportunity for the person going through it, but an absolutely massive opportunity for the employer. If you had an employer that offered you that showed that they were that supportive, that they were able to give you that time, I mean, that demands a hell of a lot of loyalty from the organization. So, you know, loads of really actionable things here, Kathryn. Thank you so much for talking us episode. I'm really, really excited about it, because I think it's one of those episodes where not only is it going to help those people that are going through this specific thing, but it's also going to massively help the people that know someone who is going through this specific thing. Something that I really wanted to incorporate into the program, and we've just managed to onboard an amazing divorce coach.
Oh, wow.
Louise Yafai. So any organization that has access to us now has access to a divorce coach that can help talk them through a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, which is really, really cool. I'm very excited to have her on board. But thank you so much. This has been a great episode, and you're brilliant. And I'm just so happy that we've managed to get you on.
No problem at all. No, and it's interesting that you mentioned you've got a divorce coach, because that was something that that I actually did through the process as well. But obviously something I looked for myself. And for me, it was a group coaching thing. So it wasn't just coaching on my own. It was with other women who were going through the same thing, or either at varying different points. And then that, I think, for any situation that you're facing, that community side of things is so helpful, because it can, you can feel very alone. And as I said, there's a bit of that kind of the shame of, oh my God, I've got to tell people that my relationship hasn't worked out, and what are they going to ask me? So I think that that coaching side of things was super valuable for me.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on.
No problem at all.
We'll see you in season 3.
Thanks very much for inviting me. And we can talk about deadlifting.
Yeah, we can. Cheers, Kathryn. Bye-bye.